These are the guys who are talking like normal Americans, but they are not centrist Democrats.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Friday, August 22nd. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are Real Clear Politics president and co-founder Tom Bevan and Emily Jashinsky, host of the After Party podcast, which is, by the way, not only fantastic, but a big hit. So first, congratulations, Emily. It seems like it's going pretty well.
Thanks, Andy. It's great to be here as always. Looking forward to a fun show.
Good. So, Tom, let's start with former National Security Advisor John Bolton. FBI agents raided his home and office this morning, Friday. This was authorized by FBI Director Kash Patel. And at least according to the New York Post, it's part of a larger classified probe that's extended beyond just him into the entire Biden administration or parts of the Biden administration. Trump claims to have had no prior knowledge of the raid. But he told reporters this morning, quote, he's not a smart guy, but he could be a very unpatriotic guy. We're going to find out. So, Tom, this looks and feels a lot like that raid back in Mar-a-Lago, which we remember. Is this political payback, or is there really a national security issue that justifies this sort of enforcement?
I assume and hope that there is a national security, that this is in fact a legitimate probe, and I have no reason to believe otherwise. I know everybody likes to jump to conclusions and say, I saw a bunch of folks, online, oh, this is authoritarian, exactly what you'd expect from an authoritarian and a dictator, payback for political enemies, blah, blah, blah. But there were concerns about Bolton's book. There were concerns about that apparently this was part of an investigation that existed under Biden, but did not go anywhere for political reasons. Perhaps they just let it sort of lapse. And so we've seen in other parts of the Trump administration, right, them going after folks so who have broken the law. And so we'll see. I mean, John Bolton, as far as I'm concerned, is presumed innocent until he'll have his day in court. He'll have his time to say what respond to these charges. But look, it was pretty shocking to see this morning when you pop open I guess the New York Post was the one who had it exclusively to see, and Kash Patel was tweeting about it or whatever. It was reminiscent, I have to say, of although there weren't any CNN cameras in his driveway. How we found out about Roger Stone when he was, they sent a SWAT team to his door, or Paul Manafort, or some of these other folks during the previous administration that were, raided. Their homes were raided as well.
Yeah. Emily, how do you see it?
Yeah, I actually just filed a piece on the Roger Stone comparison for Unheard because I'm curious how the New York Post got out there. There were Reuters photographers there. It could have been one of those things. Fox News eventually had cameras out there as well. It could have been one of those things where they were just able to get there quickly enough because John Bolton's home is in Bethesda. His office was also raided.
And Kash Patel posted about it.
That's right. He said mission, right before it happened, he said mission ongoing. And so the Stone situation arose from the Russia collusion probe. And at the time, nobody who had tried to frame Trump, essentially cook up this intelligence, as we're learning more and more about, had been charged at all. And so it was seen as really like one-sided prosecutions, and that's how Roger Stone ultimately gets pardoned. But we've been doing this for how long now? I mean, we go back to Hillary Clinton's private server, then Trump's classified documents, which turn us towards learning that Biden has classified documents. And now apparently John Bolton is mishandling classified information. The New York Post had an official saying that this goes beyond even just the book, that there are other questions. His security clearance and security detail were stripped recently by the Trump administration. So there are all kinds of things that this could be about. But it is just another moment in what I think we would have all thought was unimaginable, probably in 1995, that this is where we would be in 2025, because we are sliding into some type of banana republicanism.
Yeah, the phrase I would like to see banned from public discussion is "no one is above the law." That seems to be just sort of an excuse to go after anybody on any charges, and it does, Tom. It does seem like, to Emily's point, this is really not what you want in a democracy. You don't want people's homes being raided. And, when J.D. Vance, he was on NBC this morning, he said this. He said, if there's no crime here, we're not going to prosecute it. If there is a crime here, of course, Ambassador Bolton will get his day in court. To me, that's unsatisfying. I mean, I don't think you should be able to, or you should be doing this sort of thing without clear justification. And to my mind, I just don't see it. To me, it looks like it's an extension of this political witch hunt, which I'll admit it didn't start under Trump, but it's certainly not slowing down.
Well, listen, there were plenty of folks, including, I think, myself and Carl Cannon, and maybe even you. We can go back and listen to the tape, Andy, who warned about this thing, right? The politicization, the weaponization of our politics and of the law, which occurred under the Biden administration. And, we were like, hey, this is not a good idea, guys, to be filing these lawsuits and doing all of these things, weaponizing and going after people, politicians, and for their, differing viewpoints, essentially. And the left didn't seem to care, honestly. They were like, because it was about getting Trump and it was full steam ahead, right? And no one is above the law. That was the phrase. You heard it from Adam Schiff and all of these folks. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a genius to know that eventually the shoe's going to be on the other foot. Eventually, if this becomes the norm, we really are in territory that, to Emily's point, we never thought we'd find ourselves in this country. And it's going to be, can that genie get put back in the bottle? I don't know. So it's again, we'll see how this whole thing plays out, but it does raise some disturbing prospects of sort of where we are as a society. And again, if Democrats regain power in the next election or the one after that, you can bet there will be calls to continue and do more of the same.
Yeah.
And this is what's happening in the redistricting fight, basically.
Right. So, Emily, is there a way to put the genie back in the bottle?
Well, the argument that, you hear a lot is the only way out is through. And you hear that from the right. We've heard that from the right a lot over the last 5 years. And I'm actually completely sympathetic to it, because if you're seeing Roger Stone get prosecuted and not John Brennan, for example, or not Clapper or anyone else, perjury, for example, would be one thing that comes to mind with Clapper. If you're not seeing that, then you can't fight with one hand tied behind your back. You can't fight the weaponization with one hand tied behind your back. On the other hand, that's exactly what that scenario puts you in, exactly where Tom is. I mean, it feels like or Tom described, it feels like a catch-22. And I don't know that this is like uncharted territory, I think, for the American government, at least. So I don't have a good answer to it at all. But I think when you're looking at what's happening between Texas and California right now, Democrats have started to say more and more, sound more and more like MAGA Republicans, and the progressives, they're saying, if they're doing it in Texas, we're going to do it right now too. And both sides have been doing the redistricting thing for years. Like, we all know that. But they know right now what their voters want. I talked to one of the Democrats who fled Texas just a couple of weeks ago, and she said this is exactly the Tea Party moment for Democrats. She said it's exactly the same. They really want to see the party get punched in the nose. Its own voters want to see the party get punched in the nose a bit.
Well, Tom, I want to talk about alligator Alcatraz, which is in the news today as well. Yesterday, a U.S. District Court ordered an indefinite halt to new construction, barred any new detainees from being brought there. Basically sided with the environmentalists, and I guess it's a Seminole Indian tribe who said that this was an environmental risk to the Everglades. Set back, and really, the Republicans have said this, or I guess the Trump administration said that this is going to be a model for elsewhere. They were going to build a bunch of these sorts of things. What do you make of the setback, and how big a deal is it?
Well, I mean, on one hand, it's more the same, right? You've got an Obama-appointed judge who is sympathetic to the claims of these Indian tribes, who had no problem with this place being a flight training center. It's been there for years and years and years. And suddenly now it's a problem because they're hosting and processing detainees. I mean, you know, it doesn't really pass muster in terms of this being suddenly the environment's being, you know, degraded to a point where this thing has to be stopped. But you find a sympathetic judge, they issue an injunction, and now, of course, you know, Florida's filing an appeal, and it'll go probably all the way to the Supreme Court, and we'll see what happens there. But it's just more of the same, sort of using the justice system to try and thwart Trump's agenda. And in that sense, you know, I don't know that it's a big deal. And if it doesn't survive the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court sides with this lower court, then I think it would be a big deal. But I'm not sure. We're not to that point yet. And I suspect that, again, I'm not a lawyer. I get to play one on, you know, the podcast, but I suspect that Florida is going to prevail in this.
Yeah, I think it was Stalin who said, "Show me the person, and I'll show you the crime." Emily, it sort of feels like that with anything that Trump is doing. Like, you know, this is being challenged on environmental grounds. That does seem sort of like fairly selective. But I mean, I would imagine that if you really looked at it, they did build the thing very quickly. They bypassed probably a bunch of environmental regulations and needs for community input. There's probably 100 little laws that they violated, but does it rise to the occasion where a judge should be able to use those sorts of things to step in and stop something like this?
The particulars of this case are wild because it's a question of, as the judge decided, whether this is primarily federal. So the deportees are federal. Therefore, Alligator Alcatraz has to comply with federal environmental regulations as opposed to state environmental regulations. And so it is like way in the legal weeds and not at all what most people would think is the true question about Alligator Alcatraz, which, by the way, Ron DeSantis was on this very podcast and didn't give RCP access to inside of Alligator Alcatraz, has not let journalists look inside of Alligator Alcatraz, which I think we would all be very curious to get a glimpse at because they're trying to expand the model nationwide. Now, to the extent this is a setback for the Trump administration, I mean, Alligator Alcatraz, the beds that you can get into Alligator Alcatraz really is a dent. It's like a drop in the bucket of what the Trump administration needs to do. Even if you expand it to all 50 states and multiple in all 50 states, we're talking about mass deportations on a huge scale. And so the Trump administration, what they're trying to do with Alligator Alcatraz is to create a disincentive for people to continue to stay in the country illegally. And indeed, we've gotten numbers. I think they just came out yesterday or this morning from Pew showing that the immigrant population in the United States has declined 1.5 million people in the first 6 months of the Trump administration. That is a stunning number, and I think gives credence to the Trump administration's claim that self-deportations, because remember there were a couple hundred migrants that were originally taken to Guantanamo, because of what people have seen play out, you know, even in the streets of Washington, D.C., they're choosing to use CBP home or other methods, to quote Mitt Romney, of self-deportation.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. But I should say, Emily, before we go, I think Tom suggested that we do this podcast we host it from Alligator.
I did want to do that. I wanted to see it.
It's great.
And Emily's right. I was upset that we did not get access to, and no journalists really have had access to Alligator Alcatraz, because I wanted to see, because again, and I mentioned this at the time, you know, you read all these reports and the you know, the left says it's a concentration camp and the right says, no, it's you know, it's great or whatever. Like the only way you can really decipher it is to actually see for yourself. And we haven't been able to do that.
Yeah. But Emily, if we get the invite, will you join us on our trip?
Oh, you know I'll be there. You know I'll be there in a heartbeat.
Well, there you have it, folks. We're going to Alligator Alcatraz, and Emily's coming with. Tom, the president said earlier this week that he was going to lead a movement against mail-in voting. And we have two articles on the front page of RCP today taking a pro and con position on the issue. Very interesting. There's two former governors, both Republicans, who argue for mail-in voting, point out that Republicans did pretty well in 2024 with the mail-in vote. And then we have John Lott, who worked in the Trump Justice Department, writing against it. So, Tom, tell us about the articles and what is this debate really about?
Well, I mean, it depends on which side you're on. I mean, obviously, as we discussed this the other day, Trump is convinced that the 2020 election was stolen in part because of the mail-in universal mail ballots that were sent out by all of these states. And, you know, John Lott's article is interesting because he talks about how, you know, European countries and other countries around the world don't allow for mail-in balloting. and for their citizens to cast those. In some cases, they can only pick them up and then mail them in if they come in and show ID. And that's really, I think, the difference here. Again, absentee balloting is different. Absentee, right? You request it. You say, I live at this address. Please send me a ballot because, I want to mail it in, and that's allowed. And what I think we're talking about is the distribution of all these ballots to, voter rolls that could be old, could be outdated. You could have duplicates. You could have people who've moved to different states. All of those things, where you just have all of these extra ballots that are sort of floating around the system. But to counter John Lott, you mentioned we have these two, Jan Brewer and Pat McCrory, both Republican governors, and one of Arizona, one from North Carolina, who talk about how, look, Republicans have actually done well. They need to have to compete with Democrats. I think having mail-in balloting is helpful and useful, and they argue it's safe, and there are plenty of states, as I mentioned, Washington, Oregon, who have done this for years and years without incident. So again, I think it's an interesting conversation. It's clearly one that's in the news, and people can read both articles and decide for themselves which one they lean toward and which side they're on.
Yeah. So Emily, how do you view this?
Well, on principle, I'm somebody who doesn't think voting should require minimum effort, because that's a really slippery slope from my perspective. Because what was it, Andrew Yang this week posting, we should be making it as easy to vote as possible. People should even think about voting on their phone. We should even be thinking about letting people vote on their phone. And so in principle, I think there's something very important as a citizen about getting your butt out to the polls and casting a ballot in person. As annoying as it is, I would support making voting day a national holiday. I think that would be a really solid way to do it. So, I mean, when Jan Brewer and Pat McCrory say it's safe relative to what? That I think is an important qualification. It also, I think, is for people hard to have confidence just in the system when it's mail-in balloting, because it raises so many questions that can be, by the way, abused by bad actors who can more easily cast doubt on the results of an election. Even if it's not justified, because it's just a murkier process when there are mail-in ballots being counted en masse. So I think, in principle, there should be some principle to it, and not just it helps Republicans or it helps Democrats. I guess that's where I am on that.
Yeah, to me, it seems like there's this trade-off between this sort of chance for increased voter fraud versus increasing voter participation. I think voter participation is a good thing overall. I might disagree with you a little bit on that, with Emily on that. But we want basically people to trust the outcome of these elections. And if it's too hard to vote, people will say they're being disenfranchised. If it's too easy, people will say that cheating is going on. So it does seem we have to thread the needle. That's sort of what I got.
Maybe we should go the Australian route and mandate voting. And if you don't vote, you get fined. How about that? That would be motivation. And obviously, if the government knows who you are and they can find you, then that's a potentially secure system, right?
I guess
Andrew Yang would be president.
Yeah, right. But
Emily, you mentioned eventually we will be voting on our phones. I think that's probably where, if we look back 100 years from now or 50 years from now or whatever, there will be some system like that in place, probably. But you look at it now and you're like, oh, that would be kind of a nightmare. And 16-year-olds will be voting probably at that point, because that's the other thing. What's interesting about this is, Democrats had always thought and made the argument for decades that more voter participation helps them. And that turns out to not be the case. In this last election, the newest voters who entered into the process voted Republican. They voted for Trump. And so that kind of turned the conventional wisdom on its head that, increased voter participation always helps Democrats. That's not true.
Yeah. But Emily, then, I'm always interested in sort of the unintended consequences of these things. And it does seem to me that, Trump cannot do anything about mail-in voting. It's not something that an executive has power over. He can jawbone about it, but it's up to the states and to Congress. So he may just be discouraging people from mail-in voting again, which is what he did last time. And if he does that and mail-in voting continues, he may be dissuading some of his supporters from coming out and voting Republican in the midterm. There's a downside to this for Republicans if they don't actually get anything done to restrict mail-in voting, and I just don't think it's likely that they're going to do that.
Yeah, if he leads a movement, it's possible that what he can do is encourage Republican governors, and I'm sure this has already actually happened, but encourage Republican governors to crack down on their mail-in voting system so that it is limited as much as they possibly can do within within the federal legal structure. So I could see him doing something like that. But you're right, Andy. Part of the problem is then, do you create a lot of suspicion around particularly Republican voting seniors, for example, who may rely on mail-in balloting, around whether or not their vote will be counted, whether their vote will be snatched, whether it will be drowned out with others that are, dumped into the mailboxes, as these allegations from movies like 2000 Mules and others show. That could definitely end up coming back to bite Trump and the Republican Party.
Well, Emily, I want to talk about, I'm so glad you're on the show, because this I wanted to talk about with you. And that is this note or memo, open letter from Third Way. It's to Democrats about their language. And here, I'm just going to read a little bit from the letter. It says, for a party that spends billions of dollars trying to find the perfect language to connect to voters, Democrats and their allies use an awful lot of words and phrases no ordinary person would ever dream of saying. To please the few, we have alienated the many, especially on cultural issues where our language sounds superior, haughty, and arrogant. So they've listed, very helpful, 45 words that they think should be avoided. I wonder if you have a few favorites from the list. Here are a few of mine. Birthing person, chest feeding, which I had never heard before, but I think is great. Cultural appropriation, heteronormative. What do you make of the list? And is this helpful?
Well, this is like, I guess the first step is admitting you have a problem, but I'm not sure how influential Third Way will be on the types of people who actually use this language, because Third Way is obviously like a centrist think tank that tries to already pull Democrats more to the center. Matt Bennett of Third Way was quoted in Axios this week saying that what they believe the party needs is, quote, combative centrists. So people who kind of talk like populists, but govern like centrists, and you usually don't see those two things going together. So I'm not sure that this is actually influential on the people that they think are hurting the party, like an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Alyssa Slotkin was, for the most part, already not talking about birthing persons. Now, she has cultural baggage, that's for sure, but it's not like Tim Ryan was out there talking about birthing persons. So, I mean, James Carville started talking about this a long time ago. There have been other centrist Democrats who have been talking about this. As funny as it is that Third Way now thinks that they need to put some of this in writing, they are not, they're kind of preaching to the choir of people who for years have been uncomfortable with the chest feeding, birthing person, anti-misogyny, whatever else it is, language that Democrats have adopted.
Tom, you read the article. What do you think?
I mean, Emily makes it like Third Way. Okay, that's like, they're a small sliver of the Democratic coalition, and so I'm not sure this is, I mean, we're talking about it, so they made some news, right? It's getting some traction, but is it going to actually influence the Democratic Party and the rank and file progressives who are really driving the bus right now? No. Are they still going to say, dead naming and cisgender and all of those things? I mean, are they still going to say Latinx? Yes, of course. That's part of the cachet of being a progressive, is that you have this sort of jargon. It's how you virtue signal to people that you are one of the good ones. But at the end of the day, I think Third Way makes a very good point, which is Democrats have lost touch with sort of the center and normies on a lot of this stuff, right? When they create this and speak in this jargon, instead of speaking in sort of plain English in common sense ways, they've created this entirely other, language that again, they signal to each other online and other places, but it leaves Republicans sort of laughing and giddy, and it leaves the sort of folks who are maybe non-ideological in the middle kind of either scratching their heads and being like, what are you talking, like, what's going on exactly? Like, chest feeding, really? What? inseminated person, Governor Evers of Wisconsin. I mean, come on, it's really gotten kind of ridiculous at times. And so I think ultimately it's a good point, but one that I think will be lost on them.
I mean, Emily, it all really, if you look at the list, it all comes down to sort of what's called critical theory, right? I mean, this is all sort of this sort of cultural Marxist view of the world, and it's all based in this sort of academic view of the world. They want you to stop talking about intersectionality, for instance, which I don't see how you can be a card-carrying progressive these days and not talk and know and think about intersectionality. So, you know, they've sort of talking, you know, they're talking about language, but really what they're talking about is an approach to politics and culture and worldview.
Ideology.
And ideology. And that's a bigger problem.
Well, yeah, they're not saying change the ideology. They're saying change the words. And that's kind of funny. But if you guys remember the Iron Stash, Randy Bryce, I'm grinning ear to ear right now because I was dispatched down to Netroots Nation in, I think, 2017 or 2018 by the Washington Examiner. And Randy Bryce was trying to go after Paul Ryan from my home state. And from this like working class, populist, left, Bernie type vantage point. And at the same time as Randy Bryce was like saddled up to the bar, Kimberly Crenshaw was on stage in Netroots Nation talking about how essential intersectionality is. So I went up to Randy Bryce and asked him to define intersectionality and talk about why it matters in like southeastern Wisconsin. And it was so ridiculous. Like just the whole thing was just so insane to hear somebody who's purporting to be, the guy looks just like my uncle who like works on a factory line, like purporting to have to care about intersectionality, even talk about it. And that's the real challenge for Dems is like, are they actually beyond that? They have some candidates like Dan Osborne in Nebraska and Graham Plattner, I think is his name, up in Maine, who talk like normal human beings, but are very Bernie, ideologically Bernie coded. And so that creates a challenge for Third Way. These are the guys who are talking like normal Americans, but they are not centrist Democrats when it comes to the economy, fiscal issues, and all of that. So good luck to the Dems.
Emily, we have to talk about Cracker Barrel. Company lost $100 million in market cap yesterday, down about that's about 7% of its value. It all just follows the release of a new logo, which is part of an overall rebranding of the chain. And here's Cracker Barrel Chief Marketing Officer. Her name is Sarah Moore, talking to Fox Digital about what the company is up to.
Over the past year, we have been very transparent about our transformation platform. And one of our strategies is really centered on that physical guest experience. And we've spent the last year testing and concepting various levels of remodels. All of these various levels have been rooted in our brand DNA. They've been rooted in guest feedback, and it's all about evolution with intentionality.
That's a real soundbite. I did not make that up. Emily,
didn't we just talk about like how language is important to like talk in ways that people can understand?
This woman works at Cracker Barrel. Has she ever met somebody who eats at Cracker Barrel? I'd love to be introduced to her so I can, you know, explain to her how insane what she just said sounds. She should be taking the CEOs and C-suite folks are the ones who should be taking advice from the Third Way language experts, because that sounded insane. And it's the CEO went on Good Morning America, basically looking like she is much more comfortable at like the Harvard Club in Manhattan than
she got her Rachel Maddow glasses on.
Yeah, than her own company, like her own product, like the Cracker Barrel Old Country Store is what it's supposed to look like. It has one of the most distinct looks of any restaurant, and the new redesign is much more polished, much more like Joanna Gaines, has much more of a Joanna Gaines aesthetic, and I think it looks fine, but it doesn't look like Cracker Barrel. And Cracker Barrel exists for the nostalgia. Old Country Store, it's all in the name, and you don't have to overthink it to realize that whether or not the company is quote woke, it does have all kinds of like DEI initiatives listed on its website, but whether or not that's the case, this redesign of the logo and the stores was not going to be successful because it's going against its actual predicate, its central appeal.
Yeah. Well, Tom, you know, in defense of Cracker Barrel, their stock hasn't been doing well. The company was having some problems, I guess, and they had to do something. But this is what they decided to do.
Yeah, look, I understand the desire to want to take a brand that has been, needs a refresh. Let's just say that way. If your stores are getting sort of run down but that there's a fine line between updating something and sort of ruining it. And it's like fixing something that isn't necessarily broke. And Cracker Barrel is unique in the sense that I'll be upfront here. I've eaten there a couple times, but I'm not like a huge Cracker Barrel fan. But I've read some of the commentary, and I know people do really. The people who like Cracker Barrel love Cracker Barrel.
Thank you.
And there is a woke element to this. They did some stupid thing with like rocking chairs, like the gay pride rocking chairs on the front, which just completely pissed off their users and consumers, which was not smart. So that. But even setting that aside, yeah, you want to make changes that still keep the core of what people love about Cracker Barrel. And to Emily's point, to have the marketing officer and the CEO be the public face of these changes just sort of reinforce the notion that these people don't know what they're doing, and that they're completely disconnected from the people who actually go to Cracker Barrel. Now, I'm sure they'd say, well, we've been to restaurants and we visited restaurants and we, talked to our customers and the like, but they just seem like they're not sort of fully equipped to be making the kind of changes, because it's a really, really tough, tricky thing to do. And it seems like they've clearly mismanaged it.
But Emily, again, this is a rebranding. Companies do this all the time, but this has been being compared to the Bud Light with the Dylan Mulvaney, using Dylan Mulvaney as a spokesperson kind of thing. The conservative blogosphere has gone crazy over this thing. I mean, why does this have to be politicized? I mean, they just changed the logo and they want to lighten up the stores, I guess, let in more light. And yet it's become this sort of, cause celeb on the interweb. And, here we are once again. Now it's August. I will give it that. It's a good thing to talk about as any. But, does every move in the world today have to be freighted with this sort of politics?
If the conservative movement stands for anything, it should stand for dimly lit, claustrophobic Cracker Barrels. I'm half joking. I actually grew up with Cracker Barrel rocking chairs on my front porch. My parents decided to buy some when we stopped there one time. I don't know why, but they were great rocking chairs. And I think the reason it's political is that when you see somebody who is so disconnected for socioeconomic reasons, I would argue from their consumer base, it just looks insulting to people, and that's kind of like in a silly way. It's kind of the Trump phenomena, but it's also again, like, I know it's Cracker Barrel, it's silly and ridiculous, but they're the ones who kind of make it political by putting DEI, diversity and inclusion, having an LGBTQ plus interest group on their website, or all of these different identitarian groups. They've got a Black group, Latino group, LGBTQ group on the Cracker Barrel website. That's, of course, that stuff is going to come to light when you have the CEO coming out on Good Morning America and discussing the rebrand in a way that feels disconnected. People are going to wonder what else is disconnected from the customer base. So I think there are some Bud Light parallels, because it's such a conservative brand. It seems odd to have that sort of liberal coded stuff on it. But I agree, Andy. Like, I wish that Cracker Barrel wasn't politically coded in any way whatsoever. That just seems ridiculous in the first place.
I think they can fix this, but just hiring Sydney Sweeney and just have her go in there and get some food, film a commercial. End of story. End of controversy.
I would watch that commercial. Anyway, guys, it is Friday, which means it is time for.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious.
Tom, you don't have your T-shirt on today.
You know what? I forgot to put it on. I have it. It's right there. So, but yes, I did not put it on during the break, unfortunately.
Why don't you start us off here?
Well, so apparently this woman has been named, but I'm not going to name her. But she's a grandma from Arlington who showed up at a Winsome Sears rally as protesting her LGBTQ policies, apparently, and held up a sign that said, if you haven't seen this, it is true. It actually did happen. It said, "Hey, Winsome, if trans can't share your bathroom, then blacks can't share my water fountain." And it obviously exploded on the internet. And there's a clip of a guy coming up to her and being like, "Hey, this sign's getting a lot of negative attention." And she was kind of like, "Oh, really?" I mean, it's just she couldn't understand why anyone would take offense at this, and realized that she was, basically, and she was wearing all white, by the way, just, in case you were wondering. So I'm not
No hood.
nameless granny from Arlington. For your racist sign, you cannot be serious.
Emily, what do you got?
So other than Donald Trump himself and maybe Christine O'Donnell, I don't think anybody has ever run a funnier campaign than Mayor Eric Adams. And this week, it all continued to snowball down the hilarity mountain as Winnie Greco, an aide to Eric Adams, I believe technically a former aide to Eric Adams, but handed a reporter a sour cream and onion bag of chips that was open and had $200 inside of it, $200 inside of it as an apparent bribe. Then Winnie Greco's attorney later tried to explain it as a cultural thing because, quote, in the Chinese culture, money is often given to others in a gesture of friendship and gratitude. Greco herself said to the paper that, quote, "I just wanted to be her friend," referring to the reporter. "I just wanted to have one good friend. It's nothing." Good stuff.
All right. Well, my award for this week goes to former FDI director and apparently Taylor Swift fan, James Comey. He put out this truly cringeworthy video on his Substack channel. I'm just going to play you a little bit of it so you get a sense of what we're dealing with.
You see, Taylor Swift and I go way back. I went to my first concert of hers 15 years ago. I've been to a second, and I have helped financially support the attendance of a lot of family members at others. I'm in a family's Swiftie group chat.
He sounds like a
all her
serial
music,
killer.
and I listen to it in my headphones when I cut the grass. So yes, I have a favorite of hers, although honestly, for me, it's a tie between All Too Well, 10-minute version, and Exile featuring Bon Iver.
So I do like this line about financially supporting his family's attendance to her concerts because I have 3 daughters who are all major Taylor Swift fans. I have listened to a lot of her music over the years, and because of that, and because I love my daughters, I do appreciate Taylor Swift, and I know why they love them. But I can tell you this, that no one likes a cool dad. And if you're a male over 30 or maybe any age, you should not be telling the world about how much Taylor Swift has helped you cope with bullies. So James Comey, when it comes to music, I'd say this: fire up some Kiss. They'll be at the Kennedy Center later this year. A little Southern rock, The Clash, that's okay. Or my personal favorite when it comes to political insight is the late, great Warren Zevon, who wrote this line: "Send lawyers, guns, and money. Dad, get me out of this." That is the kind of music a former FBI director should be listening to when he mows the lawn. But Taylor Swift, no. James Comey, you cannot be serious. So we'll be back with more right after these words. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and for our next segment, RCP contributor Maggie Miller talks with Dr. Kendall Conger. He is a former Duke University physician who says he was fired after questioning the school's diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda. And he wrote about it for Real Clear Investigations. So here's Maggie Miller in conversation with Dr. Kendall Conger.
Kendall, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
So in your initial fight with Duke leadership, you took issue in ideology being put forth as science in the medical setting. Could you explain that?
Yeah, it was really strange. I thought I was there, just to practice medicine, and then they were starting to put political views on me. I was like, well, how does this advance curing cancer? How it's what these are your political values, and I just didn't think that was appropriate. And it was one thing if they wanted to say, hey, this is who Duke is. Okay, fine, you can let me know that. I think that's a little overboard. But then it's quite another to say, and you need to think this way too. It's sign on to our pledge. So I did not know how the political tide would turn or not turn. it was very fortunate that Trump got elected because almost immediately he issued 3 executive orders calling DEI immoral, illegal, and discriminatory. And it was especially the discriminatory part that caught my eyes. I was like, yes, absolutely. That's what I tried to tell Duke. I said, when you favor this group over another group, it's just a new form of discrimination. When they are shifting resources and grants and funds to one group. And it also struck me that their reasoning for it was bizarre. It's, we have to help this group because you as a white person unconsciously are hurting these people. And I was thinking to myself, how do you know what's in my unconscious mind?
Obviously, for years, people thought that STEM was immune to some DEI practices because obviously, rightfully so, it is a merit-based field. And then some science came in, radicalized, as shown in the messaging that Duke was putting forward. With the changes in policy we're seeing today, can we get back to that version of science from before, or is this way of thinking very deeply ingrained in the fabric of STEM now?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not in the academic portion of Duke. I really was just practicing my medicine without doing research at this point and without knowing how they are advancing their ideology. I know it is deeply embedded in the medical schools, in the organizational leadership, but I think the people who are on the ground, the boots on the ground, prefer just straight medical research. But unfortunately, you know how things go. Is if the money is saying we want you to find racism, well, research will start looking for racism. But I hope that will be a thing of the past.
I wanted to touch base a little bit on the fact that obviously the argument is that there is a disparate outcome impact facing people of color in health, saying that those outcomes are attributed to systemic racism. That was the messaging that Duke Health was echoing to you. Is that true, or do you attribute those outcomes to something different? How would you fix that issue?
Yeah, the disparate outcome looks real to me from everything I read. But to me, the problem was they were saying it was because of my unconscious racism and because of all of white people's unconscious racism. And so when you actually look for the data, it wasn't there. I don't even know how you do a randomized trial, randomized double-blind, placebo-controlled, real medicine trial or something like that, because you would have to know what was in somebody's unconscious mind to be able to determine if that affected their behavior.
So obviously, your situation escalated from sharing your dissent to being terminated. How has that affected your career long-term? Obviously, you cited some difficulties that you had then trying to move on to your next venture and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it was difficult because, initially when I started looking for jobs nearby, and actually, again, this is interesting. The medical people I talked to, who I was first speak with medical directors, and we would get along and they would want to move forward, but then my application would move to HR, and the next thing I would hear was, "Hey, we can't go forward, anymore." And some of them would tell me, because actually with some of them I would say, "Hey, look, let me be upfront. This is what's going on," and they're like, "We don't care. I agree with you." Yet they would get back to me and say, "Well, I guess you know what happened, right? HR got a hold of my application." So that stalled. I ended up having to, rather than be an employee, because I don't think these places wanted to employ me, to employ a person who seemed like a problem causer. So I had to go through a agency that they employ me and then they contract me out to the hospital. So I was a contractor instead of an employee.
So what do you want to leave people with as we wrap things up? And what are you looking at with regards to the future of DEI?
I think the future of DEI is that it is a sick patient and is not going to do well. It may gasp along, but I think there's no going back. It was unhelpful. It was costly. It was divisive. So going forward, I hope it's a return to normalcy.
That was Maggie Miller in conversation with Dr. Kendall Conger. You can see more of Maggie's interviews on the Real Clear Politics YouTube channel and at realclearinvestigations.com. That is our program for today. On behalf of everyone at RCP, thank you for joining us. We'll be back on Monday. Have a great weekend.